talk about whatever we want. When we publish it, we'll just publish it to whatever. It doesn't like trying to push to Twitter. Okay, remove that one. Send it to the Ruby Rogues destination. There. All right, we're live. We can keep talking though. Okay, so how big was Free Agent when you got there?
Well, there was three. I started it, so there was three of us.
Oh, okay.
I was the technical co-founder, CTO back in the day. Although to be fair, Ed, the CEO, he was technical as well, but he was the CEO, so he had to do lots of CEO things.
Right.
Well, I just had to do the CTO things.
All right.
And
Yeah, let's
was
just
there-
dive in and talk through it.
So was there ever any debate about what tech stack to use, or was it always going to be Rails from day one for you when you started Free Agent?
Yeah, no, good question, because
Hang on, let's start the
oh.
show and then he can answer these questions.
Okay.
I'll just do a quick announcement and we'll just get going. Hey folks, welcome back to another episode of the Ruby Rogues podcast. This week on our panel we have Ayush Nwatia.
Hello.
We also have Valentino Stoll.
Hey now.
I'm Charles Max Wood from Top End Devs, and we have a special guest this week, and that is Olly Headey.
Or Headey, actually.
Headey. No, it's fine.
Yeah.
I should have asked, but I assumed because I think I'm smart, and then I screw stuff up because I think I'm smart. Anyway, do you want to just? You were mentioning before the show you've worked at 37 Signals. You were the CTO for Free Agent, which is a bookkeeping and financial app for businesses. What else is there to know? What else are you famous for?
I think you've done it really well. For a start, am I famous? I don't think so. But they're the two main things, really. I mean, Free Agent, consumed 15 years of my life. So that's pretty much most things. Before that, I was a software developer. Nothing out of the ordinary. Started in the 90s. Used to do computer games originally when they came on CDs and had sprites, that kind of game. And then
you built them?
Yeah, that was my first job. I was just a programmer writing C++, and making characters move on the screen. So that was kind of interesting. Although quite hard work, I have to say. I wouldn't, if you just want a 9 to 5, I wouldn't recommend video games.
My son wants to be a video game developer, so
yeah, I mean, great fun. I mean, to be honest, probably quite different in the 90s. I have no idea what it's like today. I'm not really in there. But yeah, and then doing a variety of different jobs, and ended up being a kind of consultant. Going into banks, kind of soul destroying, that kind of thing. And then and then it's funny because I had this accountant to do my books. I had a limited company, and he used to send a spreadsheet every month and say, fill this in, so and so I had to fill in all the bank transactions manually, and then all the expenses, and then send it back over, and then he would do whatever he did, and then said, "What, you owe this much tax? Pay it here." Okay. So I had no idea about the finances, how it all worked or anything, and it just felt like a bit of a waste of time. And as it turned out, Ed, who was another co-founder of Free Agent, he had the same accountant, and he'd started work on this prototype of Free Agent using Ruby, because that was super cool, right? In 2006, that was the real hot tech. And I met Ed, and we kind of got talking, found this connection with our accountant, and he was a bit like, "Well, do you want to kind of help me build it?" I was like, "Okay," and then quit my job, and that was that. So that's kind of how it came about. And yeah, 15 years later, kind of, I left because we did an IPO in 2016 on the London Stock Exchange, and then we actually got acquired by a bank in 2018, and so I kind of stayed there for a little while after that. But then yeah, left in 2022. So that was the kind of the big startup journey of Free Agent, and Rails all the way. Ruby and Rails, that was pretty much everything. The whole app, pretty much. Not quite, but pretty much.
Was it hard to let it go?
Let it go. Well, I mean, yeah, yes and no. I think yes, in that it gives you that sense of identity, you know, and so you sort of lose this whole thing. It's like, yeah, I'm the co-founder. Well, you can always say co-founder, can't you? But you know, you can't really, you're detached from it then. But then not really, because you know, I think it had, for me, I felt like we'd almost built everything in it. Like every feature was kind of done in my mind. Like it did everything from like time tracking all the way through to kind of filing your tax returns automatically. And at that point, it's like we kind of, you know, felt like it was kind of done. That's what we set out to do back in the day. And, you know, thought we'd never get there, but we did. And yeah, and the last thing we did was this massive migration of the infrastructure to the cloud. None of this cool we move out of the cloud. We'd run the whole thing on servers, our own servers, for years, and then in 2020 we moved to the cloud, AWS, and that was a big thing, and did you know, for us was a good thing. Yeah, so once that was done, I was like, yeah, I think I'm kind of done here. But I do miss it. I still use it as well, because I do my own kind of consulting thing now and again, and so I still use Free Agent. I'm in there quite often. It's good.
Yeah, I'm a customer, and I just love it because I'm completely technical. This bookkeeping, accounting stuff is just so alien to me, and I can just click around and learn stuff from Free Agent. So it's been a boon for me as a freelancer to have that. So like, what was the motivation behind going to the cloud? Because obviously with 37 signals, all the rage is going the other way.
Yeah, absolutely.
DHH made Kamal so that he could get off the cloud.
Yeah, it is a good question. So, I mean, I guess for starting, I am a big fan of running your own hardware in many ways, because you know that's what we started doing. It was kind of the only option back in 2006, 2007. I mean, you know, we just rented a server from Rackspace, and that was kind of that. And you know, and we did use, there were all these cloud, EC2 sort of existed, but early days, you know, there wasn't much tooling around that. And there were things like Slice Host and these other cloud Brightbox, a few of these things that we did play around with just for staging servers, playing around, but the actual app ran on its own hardware. And we did, at one point, Rackspace had a cloud, and because we were in Rackspace, we were like, well, let's use that. This would be great. But we found it really flaky. It was pretty unreliable for us, and we lost a bit of trust. And then, you know, one of the guys that we had on the team was just great at building servers and stuff, networking and whatnot. So we just decided, well, let's just do it, and we just bought some hardware and racked it up and did all of that, and that's how it ran for, well, what would that be, about 9 years. But I suppose one of the big drivers was the tech we were using was kind of niche. We were using towards the end SmartOS, which you may or may not have heard of. Not many people have heard of it. So, which is basically like ultimately it's Solaris, but it's an Illumos. And we were using Triton to do containerization and all of this, but it wasn't Docker, it wasn't Linux. It's kind of niche. Worked really well, but actually, the ops team, we struggled to hire people to do it for that reason, and also they didn't necessarily want to do it as well, most people. So it was a little bit troublesome. And obviously the cloud had come a long way, which we were already using. We already were using S3, like all the receipts, everything that you kind of upload to FreeAgent, it's all in S3. And that was always the case, because you don't want to be getting into object storage yourself, really. And we were starting to do some data science stuff in AWS, and so a lot of that stuff, it kind of made sense to us. Like, well, let's just think about moving the app over. How hard can that be? And there are lots of advantages. And because we've been bought by a bank, they were kind of big on the cloud as well, and they also had quite a lot of leverage with AWS in terms of like costs and stuff. So we could kind of piggyback on some of that. So all of that coming together really helped. And yeah, it was a good move for us, I think. I mean, cost-wise, very hard to compare. I mean, maybe it's more expensive. I mean, it's apples and oranges really when you're trying to compare these costs. But the ops team getting into kind of the infrastructure automation, infrastructure as code, which we already did, but we were using Puppet and other technologies, but we kind of moved over to Terraform and all of this, which was much more. People wanted to work with this stuff, right? It was kind of like reasonably new, hot tech that people wanted to do, and so yeah, it was actually a pretty good move, I think. But I do kind of miss the power that you get from your own hardware. It's got to be said. Some of these databases on like Aurora, and you get these kind of, I don't even know what they're called, the XXLs or whatever, crazy prices really, to be honest. But as long as you can afford it and it's it fits within your budget and what you're willing to pay in terms of your margins, then it's fine. But if you're trying to squeeze margins, improve things, then sure. But we were optimizing really for a big engineering team. We had 100+ people, not a very big ops team, and we only had about 5 people doing all of that, which was about half the size of 37 Signals, to be honest. So yeah, I think that, I don't know if that answered your question. Bit of a ramble.
Yeah. No, that's very, very thorough. And so yeah, you left in 2022, and then did you go immediately to 37 Signals after that?
Yeah, it was, I mean, I didn't intend to do that. It was because I knew I was leaving FreeAgent, and at the time there were a couple of guys that had worked at FreeAgent that had gone there. They joined in like the summer of that year, 21. And I was still in touch with these guys. Really great programmers. Fantastic people. And at the time, they were looking for like a director of engineering. And I think one of these guys said, "Well, you should talk to Olly. He's leaving FreeAgent. Maybe he'd be interested." And so it was kind of like a recommendation that happened. And then, I got a call from David who said, "Do you want to chat about this?" And one thing led to another, and I was like, "This sounds pretty cool." And because quite a few people from FreeAgent, when I then joined, I joined in March 22. By that point, they'd hired about, I think there was 5 people that had programmers from FreeAgent. 37 Signals. It felt a bit like getting the gang back together again. I thought this would be quite cool. I can go and kind of work with these guys who are amazing, and get to work with 37 Signals. That sounds brilliant. And then keep me busy.
The reason I asked about the timing was because I was curious about, did you just help FreeAgent get onto the cloud, then switch jobs and help another company get off the cloud?
Well, I suppose it does look like that, doesn't it? But yeah, I think, well, my involvement in the cloud exit at 37 Signals was pretty minimal. I mean, to be honest, I wasn't involved technically really in many things there. It was very much more of a management leadership role. So unfortunately, I didn't get stuck in on that side of things.
Fair enough. So I'm not saying this just to blow smoke up your ass, but FreeAgent has one of the best web UIs of modern software as a service app that I've used, and I was chatting with one of the free agent guys at Brighton Ruby a couple of months ago, and I said this to them as well. I'm curious from your point of view as a leader, because you grew the company through the 2010s. How did you avoid this whole hype cycle of React and stuff? And because the way I see it, most web UIs are shit because people use React and shoved it where it has no business being. It's a great tool for the right job, but obviously, okay, I'll avoid the rant right now. But so, how did you avoid the hype cycle? Just keep things simple, and as such, like it's got a very snappy UI.
Yeah, Ollie,
Yeah.
how are you such a genius? Such forward-thinking genius.
Well, I'd love to claim that, but let's dive into what the reality under the hood is, shall we? So, I mean, front ends, right? Like back in 2007, the noughts, it was all, prototype JS, that kind of thing, right? The JavaScript.
Oh, you're going way back.
That was how it was.
That's when I got started.
Yeah,
was prototype, and then jQuery was like the dream.
Yeah, we didn't have jQuery, so I suppose, fortunately, in some way, we just didn't really do that much JavaScript. Like, I think the only places we really had it were populating combo boxes, that kind of thing. When you change one, the next one populates. A few things like that. So we kind of avoided it just because, well, I wasn't really very good at JavaScript. I don't think I am very good at JavaScript even now, to be honest, because I just try to avoid it as much as I can. And then, jQuery, I guess, came along, and we used some of that for a while. And I think part of the thing was that free agent scope was really broad. So when it came to dev, there were so many features that we wanted to do, and it was like everything. It's like payroll and bank, using bank feeds like Yodlee we had to do back in the day. There was this huge scope of stuff. So like faffing around and rewriting UIs was not really a useful business thing to do. So we just kind of didn't do it. We just left it. Now, except that one of the most kind of interactive parts of the app is the banking area, where you have all your bank transactions and you kind of click and you can explain them and categorize them. Now, that probably 13 or something like that. I think someone had started playing around with a JavaScript framework. I can't remember off the top of my head, actually, what that was called. It was one of the early ones, and then, which I think we actually put live, perhaps. But then someone during one of our hack days decided to try and build it in React, the banking section, which kind of works, and they got it working quite quickly in a few days. Kind of prototyping this thing. And it was better. It worked better from a UI point of view, but then it kind of grew arms and legs. And what happened with that project is that ultimately that area then became written in React, and it stuck, even though it was much more complicated. It was quite buggy because like all the validation was on the server side. So all the front end validation was being duplicated again, including, we had stuff like formatting numbers and stuff that the Rails app would do. And so when this section got built in React, then all of that had to be, people were duplicating number formatting. So it's all a bit of a mess, to be honest. And as far as I know, that is still there. That whole banking area in free agent is React inside the kind of main frame. There's not so much single page.
Looks disappointed.
But then, honestly, now I could be slightly wrong here because it's going back a few years. But then, so everything else kind of stayed the same, and because the React thing took so long, in my opinion, was a bit it's protracted and didn't really result in any kind of great value. Then nothing. We kind of made the call like nothing else in React. Forget about it. We're just going to leave it as it is and gradually improve things. By which point Turbo and Stimulus was coming along, by the time I left, then it was like, right, the future should be in. So we'll just stick with the Rails conventions and we'll do stuff that way. Ideally, maybe replacing the whole React thing at some point. But again, it's the same problem. Like, well, there's lots of other things to do. What that kind of works, might as well leave it, even though you are juggling different technologies. So it's, we did, through general ignorance, we didn't, rebuild the entire UI in React. I'm quite thankful that we didn't. I think that would have probably been a bad idea. We did have the mobile apps as using kind of, I don't think we used React Native, but I think we talked about doing that, but we ultimately just went with native. But yeah, so it's because of the size of free agent, there's a lot of different tech going on. I think we did get rid of jQuery altogether eventually. But certainly even at Basecamp, I think Basecamp still has jQuery in parts, pretty sure. Could be right, pretty sure it did as well, because these things are quite hard to extract. It's a lot of effort and for pretty much zero user benefit, pretty much. And they kind of work, right? So it's tricky managing things on that scale, I think.
Yeah, I've never understood this whole thing of rewriting stuff that does the exact same thing but in a new stack. I'm like, what's the point? It's just wasted effort. So yeah, if it works, just leave it, let it work.
I generally agree, but if the ongoing maintenance burden will be lessened by rewriting it, and it's not like a total, hey, you're going to spend 6 months rewriting this piece, right? So you have to weigh all these things. But I've worked on apps where there was a new, better way of doing things. It was not terribly onerous to change it over. Yeah, there was no real benefit to the users, except that the next time we had to come along and maintain, touch, modify, whatever that application stuff, it was going to be much, much, much easier. And so it allowed us to deliver better and faster in the future.
I feel like too, like a lot of people don't, like, they like to draw parallels of like front end coding to back end coding. And like, if somebody wants to switch to Rust, like, that's a much steeper learning curve than just switching from jQuery to React or something like that.
Yeah, but I mean, I guess what's tricky as well is when you have a lot of engineers, dozens and dozens of engineers, you get a lot of opinions as to what is the right thing to do. And even when you're talking about, let's do we'll do stimulus. That's how we're going to do these things. Then people are going to say, well, great, can we use stimulus reflex? Can we do that? Because here's a good reason to use this. Or, it's a challenge to kind of try and create standards which you ideally would like, because then everything's the same. It's a level playing field. You all know what you're working on. But in reality, it's like, if someone thinks they can do that and there's a benefit to doing that, is it bad? Is that dangerous? Are you going to end up in that situation where you're just using an obsolete technology that you have to then replace? Or actually, is it fine? You are kind of making bets regardless of what you do. And sometimes, the stimulus is good, isn't it? But in my experience, which isn't huge, to be fair, I think it's quite opaque in terms like exactly what is the best practice like for an infinite scroll. I don't know, like if you Google it, there's like loads of ways of doing it. Which way should I do it? And not a contrived example maybe, but there's that kind of thing where it's kind of, in my opinion, quite vague documentation about how to do stuff. You are kind of left to Googling or ChatGPT and hoping it comes back with stuff where, and it's the same in the business. It's like, well, I want to use stimulus reflex. Is that bad? I'm just going to include this particular JavaScript stuff and it's going to fit our needs here. Is that bad? Or is that good? I kind of think it's okay, but I'll kind of keep an eye on it. Whereas with React, that's very much, it's a different paradigm, isn't it? That's much more complicated, I think. Whereas just JavaScript libraries, yeah.
So how do you assess like switching to new technologies or adopting new things? Like, what is your thought process on like doing that?
I think my default is always, why do we need to change anything? Can we just not? Because changing stuff is just like work, and it's going to take longer than anyone says it will. And so can we can we just not? And there are people, aren't there, that still build stuff with jQuery and stuff because it just works. Is that bad? Who's that guy on X who's like the millionaire hacker guy, the nomad list guy, Peter Levels, and I think he builds all of his stuff in PHP and jQuery, isn't he? Like you can build anything with this stuff. So I think if you can resist, but then when you say you're resisting change, then you're kind of like an old dinosaur, aren't you? You don't want to change. But the reality is, when you're running a business, you do have to kind of focus mainly on customer value, and if it's not going to bring that value, or maybe like increase dev velocity by an order of magnitude or something, then do you really need to, or is there, if you are going to do it, then how can you do it incrementally? How are you going to do that? And it's like, if you want to go back to turn everything into stimulus, that's great. Don't do the big stimulus project that's just going to take 18 months. Do it bit by bit. Like we're going to work on this banking area. Let's just tackle that one while we're in there. That's more of the approach that I would really take. I think resist as long as possible until it became glaringly obvious that either everyone's going to walk out. Which is, not with our cloud stuff. I don't think people are going to walk out. But I think if we really tried to keep forcing kind of smart OS Triton down everyone's throat, I don't think it would have really ended well. We had to do something there. But from a programming point of view, I'm not sure how common that problem is really. But you do tackle hard ones, like a Ruby upgrade. What's good about things like that is that, you get the obsolescence. So you know that if you don't fix stuff by this date, then you're unsupported and you're in dangerous territory at that point. So that's quite nice when you have these actual devs. So if someone said, right, jQuery is getting turned off, you can't really do that, can you? But if they did, then maybe that would be a good thing to do. But to try and simplify it as well, though, because that's always the challenge, to try and keep the stack and everything as simple as you can, which is hard. And it's something that 37 Signals obviously do really well. But then they have fewer moving parts, I think. And they invent all that stuff anyway, so it's kind of different.
Yeah, the simplicity side of things is huge for me, and I also have an allergy for dependencies. I hate pulling in dependencies. I just I will need to have a really, really good reason before I add something to my gem file. Like it would be like literally like, I do not want to solve this problem by myself, and that's when I'll pull in a gem. Because I think most of the time you could just spend 2 or 3 hours and build something yourself that specifically solves your problem, and it'll save you so much time in the long run because you don't have an external dependency that you don't control.
Honestly, that is such good advice. I think, we maybe didn't heed that. There's always this tension, isn't there? Well, it's a bit like a build versus buy, although it's open source. You're not really buying; you're just kind of borrowing. But when you come to do a Rails upgrade, and that one gem that you use for like tagging or whatever it is, there's some gem, and it's just like, oh shit, that it's unsupported for Rails 6 or whatever. You think, well, but if you wrote your own, it's probably like a couple of classes, and not very complicated. You could do that yourself, and that's something 37 Signals do so well. Their gem files are pretty small, really. Whereas pretty sure FreeEdge is pretty large, and it's definitely something I've taken on board a lot. I think that it's good practice to try and minimize as much as possible. And I do remember at 37 Signals when they were starting on, I guess it was the calendar app, and I think David's looking at these gem files and basically, why have we got Redis? Why is Redis in there? And it ultimately led to kind of the solid cache and solid queue stuff, which is just like, hang on, database is really fast. Why would you don't need Redis? That's just a thing we just don't need, and it's a thing we have to support. Which ended up, it's funny, that ended up leading to these gems being built. Like, I'm sure they're fast enough. You know, databases are fast enough now on these new drives we've just bought. We don't need Redis, and it was almost like, I don't know whether this is what was in David. It was almost like that. It was literally that dependency that was so irritating. They will just go and build all this new tech just because that is, you know, but that's great, right? Because you know, one less dependency. Although have you, because you've now got these highly complex gems to maintain, but I don't know. Whereas Redis is pretty reliable, to be honest.
I'm curious on your thoughts about this idea, because like I have a total agreement, like let fewer dependencies the better, but at the same time, like some dependencies are like, it's better to have a community building and identifying bugs and resolving features. Like, what are your thoughts on that? Like, how do you gauge like whether or not like community support around a certain feature set or technology or gem is like worth it over building it yourself?
Yeah, I mean, for a start, I suppose you have to look at the activity on it, don't you? If it's an active gem, then, and pretty entrenched in, you know, in the community, then that's always a good sign. I don't think I would hesitate really to use the gem in that case, unless, as I say, it was so simple that you just think, well, do I really need to do that? You know, because sometimes they can complicate things, but sometimes not. But I suppose the harder the problem that you're trying to solve by using that gem, then the more likely I would say it's probably better to use a gem, at least in the first instance, right? And if for some reason it gets unsupported or causes you, I don't know, performance problem or something, then maybe do it then. But if your goal is to move fast and just get stuff done, then, you know, bring in devise, right? Like most people do that. I don't know. Whereas, you know, I built a couple of little apps recently, and I thought, I'm not going to use devise. I can do that myself. And I ended up doing my own auth, which, for better or worse, you know, it didn't take that long, but at the same time, you know, it would have been much quicker to use devise. But, you know, I don't know why. But then I've had the same problem with apps where I've used devise, and then I've wanted to kind of rip it out because it was too painful to go and adjust that template of some password. I can't even remember the examples, but, you know, some sort of like, it shouldn't be that hard. And I found there were certain things that I found hard. I'd rather just do my own kind of confirmation email sometimes. But then I guess it's also a balance of it's what time you have available, what your kind of skill level is at some level, I suppose. If you really don't want to get into that, then why bother? But if you're building a product, you know, like Free Agent or something that's at 37 signals, and maybe you just kind of, you do want to own that yourself, just in case devise stops, or if it you know, deviates from what you need, or if you want to customize it, then maybe it's just a bit too hard, that kind of thing. But again, I you know, another app I built had like Google Auth, which I thought was going to be straightforward, but that's my own naivety showing there. You know, but then I tried OmniAuth, and there were certain things, it was slightly out of date. It was a little bit fiddly. So I think if you're a business and you're well funded or making money, yeah, I don't know. But if you're a business, you're making money, or you're well funded, then, you know, maybe you should build your own if it's not going to be too onerous to do that, because then you own that tech and you can support it without question. But if you're in the earlier days, or if you don't have that, you know, capacity, just use the gem and hope for the best. But these things change. It's like ActiveStorage. You know, we used well, originally at Free Agent, like I think it was Paperclip or something, pretty good. And I think I can't remember. I think it got support stopped, but so then we moved to Shrine, and then I think ActiveStorage appeared, but then I think we left it on Shrine. But then now it's like, ooh, you're using this unusual, even though arguably Shrine is better. It's like most people don't know it; they'd rather use ActiveStorage. So, but well, I'm glad we didn't build our own one of those. To be honest, I think managing storage upload would probably have not been a great idea. I'd rather migrate from one to the other at that point.
at least you're not someone like Thoughtbot that has like all of their clients using their thing and that they now have abandoned and now have to upgrade everybody and worry about that. But I'm curious, like, so let's take a look at the dependency like aspect of things. Like, do you ever look at Rails as like, do I need Rails like kind of thing? Because one thing I've been to a lot of like, you know, non-US based or European based Ruby conferences. It's like very much like absent in those community Rails. It's like not kind of like the preferred choice. And so like
as a web framework, what do you mean they're using? What, like,
yeah, for like, you know, just
Sinatra
or like you know, some other web framework or just like Ruby specific app, like they're just running Ruby itself. Like, do you ever like think about whether or not like you need, you know, Rails for something new you're building? Like, can this work as a spreadsheet, or like is this better as a command line tool? Like, do you ever look to other things, or is it just like default at this point?
I mean, it's a good question, but I suppose, yeah, it depends what the problem is. I mean, for a web app, I would just use Rails. I mean, you could say, well, there's quite a lot of baggage, isn't there? You know, but is there? Yeah, sure, you can write a Sinatra app in a few files, but then a Rails app, you're only really populating a few files. You got like your roots, maybe you got a controller. But at least it's pretty easy to find your way around. Sinatra, maybe not. An active record is like baked in, and sure, I can pull in active record, or I don't know why I would bother doing that. I mean, maybe there's like an overhead in like memory or something. I don't really know. Maybe there's a thing there. Who knows? But personally, I would just use Rails. But yeah, command line apps, we would, you know, not use Rails for that. I mean, but it depends. Like for Agent, one of the main things it does is like PDFs of invoices, you know, and you can download PDF, attach it to an email, all of that, and so that's the kind of thing that we wouldn't do in Rails, because, well, I think it's not straightforward. So we like had a Java thing that generated that, but Rails would call it. So, you know, it was the Rails app that was kind of talking just to an API to generate this PDF. So that kind of thing, we wouldn't, you know, be fundamentalist and go, it has to be in Ruby, has to be in Rails. But just when there's a best thing for the job, you would do use that if it's not too objectionable. But honestly, Rails, I don't know why they're not talking at conferences that much about. I mean, I suppose what is there? Well, now you have Rails World now, right? So that's going to be all about Rails. So maybe the other conferences want a bit less of that. And it is interesting to hear different stories of what people are doing with Ruby that doesn't include Rails. I mean, you know, if you're working on a SaaS app, that's kind of a big part of it. But then, you know, that people are doing like data stuff with Ruby, aren't they, these days? I mean, I know Python's like the go-to kind of language for that kind of stuff, but there are people trying to do stuff in Ruby, which I think is pretty cool. But I'm not, yeah, I wouldn't be fundamentalist about it. But if I was building a web app, I would just use Rails, because it just works, right? It's great.
You're just pulling on this dependency thread a little bit more, like going back to your authentication example. I do my own auth. I don't like Device. I don't like pulling in anything for that. But the way I see it, once I've built it once, I can then, I know this is blasphemous to some people, which is copy paste the code into other apps and then tweak it as necessary, because sometimes you need to just tweak things a little bit for what the use case at hand is. And once you have something working, if you've written it well, that code should be reusable, I think. And that's something I kind of think about a lot, is that trying to maximize the reusability of code that are, and that's not necessarily in a way that it can be extracted to a library, because it's different when you've got code living in your app and when you're kind of extracting something, because I think when you put it in the gem, it's more of a black box. But yeah, copy paste code. Once you've solved the problem of authentication on your own, you know everything about how that code works, and you can just copy it into other projects. I know, what do you think about that kind of approach?
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of how I've done it. I suppose of the apps that I built, one used Google Auth, so that was slightly different, and then but the one used email authentication and one was user password, so they're all different for whatever reason. They're for because reasons. But no, if I was, I would probably do the same. I mean, Rails has baked into it, doesn't it? You know, that has secure password stuff. It's kind of baked into it now, which is great. So it's pretty easy to do that. I suppose things like the forgot password is that boilerplate of stuff, but it's quite small what you really need to do. Kind of validate the email address and forget a password. They're the things that I would need to do. But yeah, like I say, putting that in a gem is, would you do that? Because you're making assumptions about models and things. I guess you could do that. And that's what Devise has done. So maybe you should just use Devise at that point. But then Devise is quite big. It always feels quite big to me. But yeah, I suppose that's how I do it. But also what about when, you know, because usernames and passwords are unpopular, perhaps, these days. I mean, what I see using various apps around the internet, you know, is, well, 2FA, right? Like, how are you going to do that? And also, are you going to do it with SMS, email, authentic, you know, one-time passcodes? And there doesn't, or are you going to go with passkeys? Because that isn't the new thing now. And it's, I'm not sure I would do that myself. Even 2FA, you know, I don't know if you've done that yourself or not, or maybe, I mean, that's maybe something that Rails will get baked into it at some point, maybe, if that's the trajectory it's going, or passkeys, maybe that'll come. That might be a good thing. Kind of surprised it hasn't got, Rails doesn't have a Devise it built in, to be honest. Feels like it maybe should.
There's going to be something in Rails 8, some kind of generator, I think, that gives you a skeleton of authentication. And I think I remember seeing a tweet from DHH like a couple of years ago that they might do something like similar to has secure password, but for one-time passkeys, like, you know, those authenticator app, what's it called? TOTP, I think, the time-based ones.
Yeah.
I think I saw some chatter about like a has secure password flavor of that kind of thing. I don't think anything's actually gone in, but yeah, it'd be good to have for sure.
Yeah, Dave Kier has his action auth too. That's pretty great.
Yeah, action auth is nice. The thing is that, you know, kind of what Ayush is talking about. I've wanted something more like zero auth, or where essentially it is the generator that just sticks the code in. I mean, I've looked at the code for action auth. It's pretty easy to follow, but yeah, it still, to me at least, has that feeling of that black box where, you know, the zero authentication library, there's no engine, right? It just sticks the code in, and then you can modify it to make it whatever you want, and that's kind of the thing that I really like. And so I'd love to see a lot of these common problems. In fact, I negotiated with Daniel Kehoe. I don't know if you guys remember him, but he had a series of Rails apps that he had recorded videos of himself building way back in the day, and he had a project called Rails Composer, and essentially it asks you a bunch of questions and then populate your gem file. And yeah, that's my idea behind that. He gave me the domain, and I want to just build a series of things like this. So it's like, hey, you have this common thing, and yeah, rather than have another gem added to your gem file, you literally have Rails Composer in there in your development group, and then you just run the generators, and it generates it, and then kind of has the documentation in line like the Rails stuff does, that may point you out to videos that show you how to modify it to be whatever you want it to be. Because I really, you know, and it's funny because initially I was gonna do engines, and then I started reading Ayush's book, and it walks you through building the authentication, and I'm like, this is just so much cleaner in so many ways, and I can make this into whatever I want. right? It gives me the freedom to just do what I need. And so, yeah, I can give you all the pieces. It'll have a nice interface. It'll all be Tailwind or whatever, right? But then you can just go in and modify it. So if you're using Bootstrap or something else, if you need it to do a couple of extra things, if you need it to trigger some jobs, well, it generated the code. It's in your code. You check it in so you can change it. Anyway.
Yeah.
But I've been very inspired by this idea, right? Do I need a gem for this or not? Like, I've been using Friendly ID for years, and I figured out that in about 30 lines of code, I can create a concern that I can pull into any model I want, right? And so then it's, okay, so why am I using a gem for this, right? This is code I understand versus code I could go look at it. I'm sure it's relatively easy to follow along with. But yeah, then why do it the other way?
Olly, I'm curious, like, you have a lot of experience in like product development and like the business focused aspect of like building things, right? So I'm curious, like, what your thoughts are on like, you know, where the technology like is most helpful in the process, in the business side or developing the product, and like why are you still sticking with Rails at this point with all of the other stuff that's available? Is it familiarity, or like where do you see like the technology really aligning with that aspect?
Yeah, I mean that's a good question, right? Because, well, I'm not kind of setting up a big SaaS business right now, but if I was, would I use Rails? I mean, me personally, if I was like a founder CTO again, I probably would, mainly because that's like all I know, and I'm kind of institutionalized in Rails, right? So there's that. But I still don't think it would be a bad choice. I think it would be a good choice because, you know, as you know, you can build pretty much anything you need to with Rails. Certainly good enough, and certainly in the kind of B2B SaaS space, of course, like that, which is, you know. But that said, you know, it depends what you're building. If you're, you know, if it's a consumer app, are you going to be able to do what you need to do on the front end with you know, Rails stimulus? Is that you know, good enough, or do you actually need to lean on the community of more JavaScript stuff, whether that's React or Vue or whatever else? I mean, you can still use Rails on the back end, but are you then moving into a different architecture driven because of your needs on the front end? I mean, maybe that would be a different consideration. I think at one level, I honestly don't think it really matters, because technology is not usually the thing that kills businesses. It honestly doesn't usually matter. Like the main problems with businesses are like product market fit. Like you've built something and no one wants it, or you've marketed it wrong, or you can't get the distribution. That's usually the problem, not tech. Businesses that don't usually fail because someone picked Rails or someone picked TypeScript or whatever. That doesn't seem to be a pattern. So I don't think it really matters. But what I do think is interesting, so I do kind of talk to a lot of startups, done some kind of like investing and stuff, but I you know, and generally in the startup community, and virtually none use Rails. But in fact, maybe none that I've spoken to, that is. Whereas a React on the front end and something on the back end that is typically Node TypeScript, maybe Python, is the prevalent tech of today, which I find quite fascinating. But these teams move fast, and they get stuff done. They, you know, just like we do with Rails. So, you know, but it's arguably a bit more. Is it more complicated? It feels more complicated to me. But then, you know, at the same time, companies building on cloud tech as well, right? And they're just leveraging serverless to do a whole manner of cool things, which, you know, there are legit use cases for doing that kind of stuff. But at some level, I don't think it really matters. I think Rails is still a brilliant choice. I would do that, but again, that's because I'm probably institutionalized. But I wouldn't go and learn new tech just so I could build, unless it was for a specific advantage. You know, if you were doing some kind of AI stuff and you must use Python, then sure, do that.
Is there an example in Rails where like you found that feature being there just saved you a ton of, you know, effort if you had gone with something else in the moment?
It's a good question. I was doing some stuff early this year that did kind of touch on it. It was to do with image categorization, photographs, trying to kind of categorize photographs. And I was using APIs to do that, like Microsoft APIs. They didn't support Ruby out of the box. They don't, they have JavaScript, I can't remember, JavaScript, Python, Java, maybe C#, maybe because it's Microsoft, I can't remember. But those are kind of the libraries and the SDKs that they offer. They don't offer Ruby, which is a shame. But there are gems that kind of wrap this stuff up. And so that was quite interesting. But then some of the functionality that, AI is not my thing really, but I was kind of toying around with this stuff. And Python does have a wealth of these libraries to do a lot of kind of machine learning algorithms, which Ruby doesn't really quite have. There are people that are creating similar libraries out there for some of this stuff, but it always feels, I don't know, not quite there. So from an AI point of view, if you're just calling APIs, of course, fine, you can do that from anything. But if you're then trying to do some stuff yourself using the code, then it doesn't quite feel like the right choice. But maybe that's changing. It's only superficial knowledge that I really have of that. But I can't think of really off the top of my head other examples. There was this PDF thing that was a very good example where you just couldn't. What are you going to do? Do it with prawn or something? Whereas we were using Java libraries that actually did proper PDF rendering. But there were other ways we could have tackled that, but we chose the different tech path as opposed to finding a Ruby way to do that. But I'm sure there are lots of other examples. But I think where Rails does seem to shine is when it's much more of a well, people call them CRUD apps, don't they? Which is like kind of, it's kind of a bit demeaning. It's like the agent is a CRUD app. Yeah, I guess. It you take some input and you save it to a database, but at the same time, like, come on, there's like 500,000 lines of code doing lots of stuff, but I guess it's a CRUD app, you could say. Same with Basecamp as well, CRUD app. Then what isn't? Notion's a CRUD app, isn't it? I don't know. So that's who knows. So a CRUD app, I'm a bit like, hang on, that's everything at some level, isn't it? Apart from maybe ChatGPT or something, but we're not building that.
Yeah, most apps are CRUD apps. I think it's just something people don't like saying. My client at the moment is actually is a startup, and we're completely Rails. So there is at least one startup. And I had briefly spoken to another startup a couple of months ago about working with them, and they were going to be completely Rails as well. The way I see it, if there's something that you can't really do in Ruby or in Rails, it's usually something with quite a small footprint, and you can just extract that into its own service and build it using something else. So like the PDF thing you said, so yeah, you can't do that in Ruby. I could build that one tiny thing using something else and then just call it.
Yeah, and I think that's entirely the right approach. But yeah, good to hear there's more startups that a lot of people building like indie hacks, which is kind of like another kind of really derogatory terms, but actually kind of that's where everything starts in a way. Using Rails, it's just that a lot that I've seen. So hopefully we'll kind of see it. I think this is where like the Rails Foundation does come into play. There's a lot of money there, and they're doing some cool stuff. There's obviously the conferences, and the guides looking a lot better now. But for me, it's like the outreach and how can the Rails Foundation just get people at an earlier stage in their career, I guess, and even boot camps and the rest of it to start using Rails, because boot camps did do Rails back in the day, and now they have tended to move, from what I understand, to more of a kind of a JavaScript ecosystem, which feels, I don't know. I mean, to put yourself in the place of someone on a boot camp who doesn't know anything about programming, and all of a sudden you're like having to do like React, it sounds overwhelming to me. Whereas at least with Ruby, it's like kind of, here's an ERB template and it's just basically HTML. That feels a bit less, but maybe when people go through these boot camps and do great. So it could just be my own biases here that are showing. But I think that's going to be an important part of Rails' future success, is to get in at the ground again and make people realize that how great it is. And I think, that's part of the job of the Rails Foundation, but get everyone else shouting about it as well, really. So hopefully, I'm hopeful that this is already happening and will get better as well as people. Because there was a talk, wasn't there? Was it Irina from Evil Martians, and she did a talk about startups on Rails or something. I didn't see the talk, but I think I've seen the slides. And she talks about some really interesting companies, and companies that were built in other tech that are moving back to like a Rails. We were all microservices, and now we're going to come back to a Rails monolith because, frankly, it was just chaos. And now this is far simpler, and we didn't really need all of that complexity and distribution. We just needed an app with a big database, and that goes a long way usually. So hopefully we'll start to see this change.
Yeah, I think boot camps have just kind of generally moved away from teaching web fundamentals. Like, it'd be good, just to have them go back to teaching literally the basics of web development: HTML, CSS, JavaScript, and obviously I'm biased with Ruby and Rails. But because last year I helped out with the Rails World website, because the Rails Foundation wanted a junior developer to build it, and they wanted someone to mentor the juniors. I helped out with the mentoring, and she was a bootcamp graduate. She graduated from Lewagen quite recently, and they had a little bit of Rails and quite a lot of React in the curriculum, if I remember correctly. And I remember showing her what you could do with just a custom element in JavaScript, and it was like, whoa, this is so easy. And it's like, I just wish bootcamps would teach that kind of stuff a bit more.
Yeah, and like you say, teaching JavaScript is super important. You have to kind of know JavaScript, but not necessarily at a hugely complex level. Like you say, little sprinkles of the JavaScript is often more than enough to accomplish what you need to do, and certainly at the bootcamp level. But on the other hand, then it's this chicken and egg problem. They're trying to get people jobs. That's what they're there for. And if all the jobs are React, then it's their duty to then go and teach people what's going to get them most likely to get them a job, so they can have their placement stats nice and high. So it's a tricky one. You need the jobs. Otherwise, the boot camps might say, "Well, this Ruby stuff is a bit weird, isn't it? There's no jobs in that, so why would we bother teaching it?" And then you're on a bit of a downward spiral. So, yeah, tricky.
Yeah, it's also, I think, a little bit of just short term versus long term. Like, learning React will get you a job in the short term, but then when React goes out of vogue, you won't have that foundation of basics to kind of fall back on and then learn something else. But that's a different discussion, I think.
Yeah, I think so. It's pretty entrenched, I would say now. I think pretty much.
Yeah, that's true.
Here to stay.
Sadly.
Well, anything else that we want to dive into here?
We didn't touch on the old Rails assets, the original article that you got in touch about, I suppose.
Yeah, we should definitely do that here for a minute. I actually am kind of curious about it. So I have to admit, I haven't read the article. I didn't see that was. I'm working on a better system for letting us know what we need to read in order to prepare.
Yeah, for sure.
In the meantime, yeah, I think. Well, actually, why don't you just give us the 10,000-foot view on what the article's about, and then we can kind of attack it.
Yeah, of course. So it was one of those things where I was running an app, and I'm loath to pay anything more than I need to, the absolute minimum amount for a server to run this thing on, right? And it's using ActiveStorage to store uploaded content. But the particular app that I was building involved customers uploading photos in bulk, so dragging potentially hundreds, small hundreds of photographs into a drop zone thing, and uploading them all, and then viewing these things in the app, so you can view 300-400 photos in a gallery. Of course, with like infinite scrolls on, but this is quite a lot of requests on the app when your images, are in ActiveStorage, and with my tight-fisted ways, I did, that's quite a lot of traffic hitting my app just on one page. It's a lot of requests, that I'm having to serve. So like, these images should really be on a CDN. Why are they even? The request should go directly to the CDN. I don't want these requests hitting my app. And that, so that was where I started thinking, well, how do I solve this? How hard can it be? And well, it's not that hard, but it's quite convoluted. Like, so, but there were sort of two related problems, which are slightly tangential. One being Rails assets, the CSS and the JavaScript and whatnot. The other being the ActiveStorage images. And solving those, getting those onto a CDN, two different problems. That the assets approach, I was using Cloudfront because I was on AWS, and all the images are in an S3 bucket. So I thought, well, Cloudfront's the obvious thing here. That must be pretty straightforward. But and I presume it's similar for other CDNs. But I was just using Cloudfront, and I had these free credits anyway, so might as well. And configuring that, and this wasn't really documented in the Rails guides, particularly, kind of, but not really. And so getting the assets on there was one challenge, which involves kind of trying to understand exactly, how to configure Cloudfront and the bucket and cores and this kind of stuff. And then the other was how to do the ActiveStorage assets, particularly as well. And this is in a different use case, but similar with action text. Some were just ActiveStorage, has one attached, so just a file attached to or multiple files attached to a model. The other being in action text, images that are inside an action text block, so indirectly ActiveStoraged on my model. And trying to solve that was kind of an interesting one as well, because you have to set up particular routing, direct routes to do this, and involved environment variables and different, and understanding how to actually configure this Cloudfront CDN as well, which I have to say is still part mystery. Like I figured out how to make it work, but why specifically certain things I had to do when recommended configurations didn't actually work is still a mystery, and I wasn't that interested enough to actually go and understand exactly why. But I did document it in this article, like, here's what I did, partly for my own benefit, because like, if I have to do this again, I'm literally never going to be able to understand what to do, because it took me a while to figure it out, because not that much information was out there. Bits and pieces on the Rails forums and various blogs, but so I thought I'd try and encapsulate it, and it does seem to have worked, because I have had a few people get in touch saying thank you for writing that, because I was banging my head against a brick wall trying to figure out how to make it work. So another thing, I suppose, that maybe that Rails could make a little bit easier, although it is quite complicated, isn't it? All of this direct uploads, if you look at the code in Rails for how that works, it's quite hardcore in my opinion. So that's the sort of top level. That's where it came from and how I approached it.
It's kind of funny because we talk about your PDFs example as being like a great use case for Rails. I feel like files in general, like if you want to just like get a file upload working, like Rails is great for that. But like if you want to cache it the right way, it's very complicated. But I feel like that's also true of anything, right? Like getting CloudFront hooked up to any app in any language is a complex process. Like, and then how do you like, what is the famous saying? Cache and validation is like one of the hardest, naming and cache and validation. So I mean,
absolutely.
Is there even a way to simplify this? Like,
I mean, what the correct thing I should have done, because it was AWS, was to kind of write that as code. Like here's a Terraform script that will set up your, right. I didn't do that. It probably slightly beyond me, or beyond my patience. I should probably say I have this patience problem where I'm just impatient. So the correct thing would be to study the Terraform and beautifully present this. This is what. But I haven't got time for this. The crazy thing is, of course, I have time. I just choose not to. But yeah, I think that could help, because then you're expressing in code exactly what you're doing on the CloudFront. And on the S3 bucket in the case of ActiveStorage. But on the Rails side, I mean, there's not that much to do. I mean, once you've certainly with the assets, there's virtually nothing to do. You just have to set the asset host. All the configuration is in AWS. Whereas with the ActiveStorage, you have to create this direct route, and then with action text, you have to then go and find the blob partial, and go and change the route in the blob partial and things like that. But once you've done that, it's kind of straightforward. But it's fiddly. But I think that it's mainly fiddly because of the AWS. And if you could automate all that stuff yourself. But I suppose a good test would be to try it on another CDN, of which I've not done. Would it work on DigitalOcean or some other? People have the other image specific CDNs, don't they? Especially on the larger side of if your app is big commercial app, you might not use CloudFront at all. You might go for one of these proper image CDNs. I have no idea whether that would be easier or more difficult, but presumably from a Rails point of view, kind of the same. You just have to get this route to point to the right thing. So it is. It's more of an S3 CloudFront problem, I would say, than Rails.
Yeah, it's interesting too, because you mentioned kind of the uploads in ActiveStorage, but one other thing that I thought about is just my precompiled assets, putting those on a CDN. For a lot of the same reasons you mentioned, right? It's like, oh, you've got to pull maybe a couple of JavaScript files or my CSS or a bunch of images that, they're not ActiveStorage managed. They're just right.
But yeah, the article does that one is pretty straightforward to do that. You just have to once you've set up your CloudFront instance and set the kind of core stuff, then you just set the asset host in your Rails app, and it just works. It's magic. Awesome. Like it literally just works. And that none of those requests are now hitting your app every time you deploy the cache. It gets updated. So it's great. Well, to my knowledge, that's a big improvement. Hasn't had any issues that I'm aware of. I mean, CloudFront's pretty straightforward at some level. Works really well. Obviously, you have to be you don't have to be on AWS for that, but I guess it helps if you're all in there.
Right.
It'd be interesting to know, though. If you're, I don't know. Depends what the thing is. This is another thing, isn't it? Like, where do people deploy their Rails apps? What's the go-to thing? Because again, nothing's perfect, but Kamal looks great to me, but then it's like, hang on, I've got a database. What do I do? And it's like, all right, well, do I have to pay crunchy data now? And well, if I do that, then what if my app is on Hetzner, but do I now have to do I run that in a Docker container? That isn't for me, that isn't covered. Whereas actually that's the most important thing. I don't really care about my web servers. It's my database that I care about. And Heroku was good, but then they're really tight-fisted with their resources, which I don't like. But so I don't know. That's another whole conversation, I guess, and maybe for another time. But the definitive kind of, I think Kamal is going. I really like it. It's going in the right direction, but it doesn't quite get me what I want. Whereas like DigitalOcean, is it the app one, the Docker-based one that they have, is really good idea, but in practice in my opinion, hasn't been. It's not great, a bit slow, but conceptually it's great because you can get managed databases there. I can just kind of deploy my thing via Docker. So that seems great. But yeah, again, there's quite fragmented. Where do you host? People have different opinions on that. Personally, I've just been using like AWS because I had loads of credits and Hatchbox because it's just literally, I don't even think about it. I just click a button and it works, which I think is great. And it supports Chris Oliver's brilliant Hatchbox, so happy to hand him money, so that kind of interesting. But Kamal, if Hatchbox had Docker, then it would, that's it. It's kind of like, it's almost game over at that point, I think. But
yep,
I'm a big fan of render.com. So they're a bit expensive, but in terms of like ease of deployment, I just I find it to be Heroku, but for 2024.
Right, yeah, seems to be pretty popular. But yeah, I was just driven by, cause, if you go to AWS and you kind of go, yeah, here's my startup, you get like 2 years of all these credits. Great. I mean, it's a complete bait and switch thing from them, but actually pretty good. So you can kind of, I think I got like $1,000. Kind of goes a long way, It's great. But yeah, ultimately, would I do that? Maybe not. Maybe render. Yeah, looks pretty cool.
Cool. Well, let's go ahead and switch gears and do picks, and then we'll wrap up. Ayush, do you want to start us off with picks?
Yeah, easy one this week. Haggis Ruby, new conference in Edinburgh in 24th of October. Both Olly and I are speaking, so come for his talk, stay for mine. What else? Is there anything else? I'm about to rewatch The Big Short with my friend this evening, so non-tech pick, The Big Short. If you haven't seen it, go watch it. Yeah, don't think I've got anything else today.
Awesome. Valentino, what are your picks?
I've been working on this fun project called Podcast Buddy. He's actually listening right now. It's an AI companion that just lives in the terminal. And I can ask him questions right now, but I don't know what he'll respond with. So I'm going to, it's not polished, but he, just at the end of the episode here, he'll create some show notes for us on what everybody's been talking about in a nice organized format with links. So it's really fun. I use it for meetings too. Another version of it, I have a meeting buddy, and it's just so much fun playing with Whisper and doing things locally with all these LLMs and audio. It's a lot of fun. So check that out, Podcast Buddy. And then I found this, somebody has this project called Le Robot, where they're building a robot arm that has like a trainable robot arm that comes with, that you can build with it to train it to do different things. And so somebody created a tutorial on how to do it all. And so I downloaded all the files and printed out all the parts. And I'll be building that just for for fun to train a robot arm to do different things in my office. So we'll see how it goes.
Very cool. I'm going to jump in with some picks. I always do a board game pick first. I always sometimes get long-winded, so I'm going to try and make this brief. I'm going to pick Challengers, and I think I've picked this before, but Challengers is effectively like War and Capture the Flag. So you flip cards over out of your hand until you've played more points than the top card of the other player, and then you get the flag, and then they do the same thing. When you lose the flag, then your cards go onto your bench. Once your bench is full and you can't place another card on it, your opponent wins. Or if you run out of cards in your hand, your opponent wins. And then you play 7 rounds. You rotate between the other players. It'll play up to 8 people, right? So you have 4 simultaneous matches going on at the same time, or 3 or 2 or whatever. If you have an odd number of people, there's a robot deck that kind of gets harder to beat as the rounds go on. But theoretically, you're drafting cards and building your hand or your deck up, so your deck should be stronger, and so you should be able to hold out with the robot. Board Game Geek weights it at 1.78, which means it's pretty easy for casual gamers. And it's 8 and older can play it. So anyway, that's my board game pick. I just finished a book. It's the book on mental toughness by Andy Frisella. You have to actually go to his website to get it. Walks through the 75 hard program, which I'm in the middle of right now. I'm on day 17 of 75 days, and it walks through the whole program. It's awesome. So it's part physical health, part mental toughness, part other stuff. So go check that out for sure. He also has a podcast, Real AF, which is worth checking out. And then part of the program too is you have to read 10 pages out of a book every day. And so the book I'm reading now that I finished that is Awaken the Giant Within by Tony Robbins. And I am really liking this book. So I'm going to pick that too. Ollie, do you have some picks for us?
Sure. Well, I'm going to big up Friendly RB, which takes place in September 18th, 19th, I think, in Bucharest, Romania. And I'm speaking there, but there's a whole bunch of much better speakers than me, which you should go and check out. I believe there's still some tickets left. I have a discount, but I don't think I can announce it. You can find me, and if you want a discount, I can give you a discount to that. So I big up that. What else? I had this I've been on Twitter for since back in the day. But I've been checking out Blue Sky lately, which I've passed me by a bit, but I kind of really like it. So I should probably be on Mastodon, shouldn't I? I don't think that kind of passed me by, but big up Blue Sky. Go and check that out. I think it's quite interesting what they're doing. And I suppose this is probably going to go out too late, but anyone happens to be at Edinburgh.
Is he breaking up for anyone else?
Yes.
Okay.
Disappearing. Can you hear me?
Oh, that's better.
Yeah, you're back now. We lost you for a moment.
Was there a glitch?
You got the
I did see some.
Yeah, there was a glitch. Your kids must have been streaming Bluey too fast or something.
Do you know what? My son's probably just gone on his gaming PC. That is probably there's probably a connection there. But I was going to say, I don't know if this is going to go out after the weekend, probably. So it might be too late for people at the Edinburgh Festival. But I saw this show the other day, called Sawdust Symphony, which was one of the most incredible things. I've seen some crazy stuff at the Edinburgh Fringe, but this was on another level. It was, the way they pitch it is carpentry meets circus, and it's like three German guys for an hour on the stage doing things with wood, and the whole stage show that including lathes and glue. It was, honestly, it sounds ridiculous, but it's absolutely incredible. So you can probably see some videos of it online. Sawdust Symphony. I've never seen anything like it in all my years, and I have a lot of years under my belt these days. So that would be mine.
This
Cool.
looks incredible. Thank you.
if people want to connect with you, how do they find you on the internet?
Yeah, I would say on Twitter, but not anymore. I have a website, headey.net, and that has my links. I'm on Blue Sky and Threads, kind of trying to say hello, Instagram, or just email me. I'm just olly@hey.com. So yeah, that's how to find me. But headey.net is my kind of home, I suppose, on the internet with my blog and stuff like that.
Awesome. Well, thanks for coming. This has been a lot of fun.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah. And we'll wrap it here till next time. Max out.
Thanks very much, guys.
See ya.
See you later.
All right. Hang on for a second while we